It is so awesome to see all your faces, all these new members, and you guys are beautiful. You might not know it, but you are. And how long ago was it, Kevin, that you prayed that this would happen? He prayed that the church would be filled. And you guys are an answer to prayer. Every one of you. Every one of you. You are here because you were prayed for. God loves you and he brought you here. And we are so excited to have you. The kingdom of God is rejoicing every time a new person comes to Jesus. So thank you for being here, all of you. Let's see. Accident or design? When I was a kid, my father was probably he was the wisest, most hardworking man that I had ever known or thought could be. However, as I got older, as a rebellious teenager, I used to jokingly call him Captain America. Okay. There you are. That was my dad. That was my dad. Kinda. Well. Yeah, he didn't drink, he didn't cuss, he made sure that we said our prayer before dinner every night, and he made sure we were in church every weekend. If my dad had a fault, he was a workaholic. So he would go to work in the morning, go to his office. He'd be gone all day. He'd come home around 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. Mom would have dinner ready. We'd eat, and then bam, he would go down to his office in the basement, and nobody saw him until after everybody had gone to bed. He would be there till midnight working. And he did this just about 5 days a week. He was an engineer, a designer by trade, and so he was very analytical, and there was something that he loved more than anything, and that was science. Are there any people here old enough to remember Jacques Cousteau? Oh yeah, come on, I know some of you. Well, Jacques Cousteau, he was a French researcher and oceanographer and author, and he had developed advanced ways for swimming under the water and for photography underwater. So I'd say a couple times a year he'd have a special on TV. And that's the one thing that would get my dad to emerge from his cave in the basement. And he'd join us as a family, and we'd all sit around the television in the living room, and we'd watch this special, and we'd explore the mysteries of the ocean and the deep, and see all these incredible creatures and coral and so forth. Well, there was another guy about this time. Anybody remember Carl Sagan? Come on, anybody? All right, Carl Sagan oh yeah. There we go. Thank you. I just got so engrossed. Okay. My wife's going to help me because I won't remember to push the button. I'll just hit you when it's time. Well, now you made me lose my place. Anyway, Carl Sagan. Anyway, he did the same thing for the cosmos that the other guy did for underwater. And he would take us on these adventures a couple times a year into the cosmos. We'd study the universe, and he would talk about how it all came about in the Big Bang Theory, and he'd talk about the Earth and how it got formed and started and so on and so forth. And back in the 60s, as far as I remember, It was accepted fact that all of us came from primordial ponds in the very beginning of Earth's forming. No. Oh yeah, let me see. No. Millions of years ago, we crawled out of this soup and became what we are today. In the public school system, the science books all supported this idea. And because of that, I drifted away from God. As I got older, eventually went to college, I couldn't merge these two ideas that God created the earth in 6 days, and then the popular scientific view was it took millions and millions of years. Well, many years later, my father was in a nursing home, and I'd go to visit him several times a week, and we'd sit and have these long conversations. We'd talk about everything from the weather to politics to old times, family, history. But whenever the subject of religion, faith came up, I saw this sadness, this kind of an emptiness in my father's eyes. His faith had been very much challenged because of his love of the popular science. And I was so saddened that as he was about to step into eternity, he did it not even sure if God existed. So this is a very personal thing for me. And I believe a lot of Christians have had this experience, and I think a lot of people have tried to merge the idea of popular science and evolution and then God. And in order to do that, you have to throw significant portions of the Bible completely out the door. It doesn't work very well. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever been conflicted with this? Yeah, I think most of us have. I mean, it's hard to hear what we're taught about how we came about over and over and over again from the news media and from popular science, and then go to church and hear the complete opposite view. Well, my goal today, with what little bit of limited time I have and limited scientific ability that I have, science was never one of my top subjects in school, is present a small sampling of some of the advances that have been made in science today to challenge this idea that we just didn't get here by accident. No, you're going the wrong way. There you go. Anybody recognize this guy? Yeah. There has never been any one thing that has led more people to turn away from God than Charles Darwin's book, The Origins of Species, published way back in 1859. Prior to this, all science operated under the assumption that the world came about with a design. There was a plan. But once Darwin produced this book, it created a fundamental change in the way science looked at the world and how we came about. It's still widely accepted to this day. Darwin theorized that all life was the result of purely undirected, and the emphasis is on undirected, natural forces, time, chance, and a process he called natural selection. It made sense 165 years ago. Back in the 1800s, scientists thought the cell, which is the foundation of life, was basically a glob of inorganic substances, kind of like a blob of jello. Darwin's tree of life illustration, which attempted to explain all the variations of the species and where we came about. You can see us right there in the top in the middle, next to the monkey and the, I don't know what that other thing is. There's a problem though, because as you get down to the base of the tree and the root section, which is where a lot of the basic life forms were supposed to come from, it raises a bigger question. How did life begin from non-living materials to the first living cell? That is a huge question. Have you ever wondered? How did a bunch of chemicals, non-living chemicals, transfer to that, a living cell? Scientists can't answer this. I mean, they try, but they can't. In 1953, a researcher named Stanley Miller tried to demonstrate how the first life emerged. He attempted to create the Earth's early atmosphere in the laboratory. He took a test glass for a lab experiment, and he filled it with perfect acidity and alkalinity, create a perfect environment. And then he added a concoction of what he thought were the original gases that were on the planet at the time it was in its early stages: methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. Then, yeah. Well, he did the same thing. He added an electrical charge. Isn't that how we got Frankenstein to come alive, or the monster? You add an electrical charge. So he did that in the hope that he would produce some amino acids. These are the components that make up the protein of the cell. That's how the cell runs, is with the protein. So, and here's the thing, he did produce a small number of amino acids. Well, contemporary science at that time just were excited because this was proof to them. This is all the proof they needed to show that we came from primal goo. But then 10 years later, in the 60s, geochemists revised this because they realized that the gases that he had selected were too light and they would have just flown off into space. They had to revisit this and figure out what were the gases in the original planet. So they realized that it was probably the gases that we see today coming out of volcanoes: carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. Well, Stanley Miller redid his experiment and it failed. He was not able to produce any amino acids. Well, not to give up on the theory, because evolutionists are convinced that they're going to prove it somehow. So later, a biologist named Jonathan Wells did a follow-up experiment. Jonathan's on the right, by the way. He took a test tube and he created, again, a perfect environment for the cell. Alkalinity, acidity, just the right temperature. But he cheated. He cheated. He took a living cell and he added it to the test tube. Then he poked a hole in it, allowing the organic material in the cell to leak into this perfect environment. Well, that did not work. He could not produce a living cell, even with all of that. So no matter how many amino acids you use, or even parts of a living cell, you still can't produce another living cell. In the past half century, science and the knowledge of the cell has exploded. With our powerful technologies today, we've learned more about the cell than Darwin could have even imagined. It's endlessly complex little world, microscopic world. We can take our microscopes and magnify the cell 50,000 times. And you know what we found? Miniature electric circuits and miniature machines in every cell. Let's consider one such machine called the bacterial flagellum. It took me a while to be able to remember that and say that. It's cute though. It's got like a little tail and next. This little bacteria actually has a tiny outboard engine that actually propels it through the liquid of the cell. Now, believe it or not, it has a motor, a drive shaft, and a propeller. This little propeller rotates at 100,000 RPMs, can stop on a dime, and can reverse. What do you think about that, Amber? Impressive, huh? Huh? If any one of the 40 parts of this machine are not present, it can't work. It can't do a thing for the cell. One scientist calls it a forward reverse proton motor. Kevin, you should probably be up here talking about this because this guy knows a lot about motors and electronics. Well, scientists have no explanation for how this could just happen. I mean, they try, but in reality, it's a mystery. Did you have any idea this little machine was in a cell? Well, here's a key thought, if we can remember this. Chance doesn't allow for planning a complex machine. You can't just throw tons of time and millions of years and expect that to happen. These machines have many parts that have to work together and have to be assembled. They can't just mindlessly grow out of an accident or a chance. Next. Darwin himself said, if it can be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Darwin actually presents the potential downfall of his own theory. Now here's this next cell or facet of the cell is way over my head, but I'm going to do the best I can. You know what that is? Well, yeah, that'll make you happy, doesn't it? This is DNA. Now, all of us are probably familiar with DNA because every time crimes get solved, we always hear how they use DNA evidence. You know, you watch CSI or any of these programs, you know. But did you know that the DNA is like a computer? It's been proclaimed that there is no entity in the known universe that stores and processes more information efficiently than the DNA molecule. How many of you have a computer? Come on, raise your hand. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay. Most of us have a computer, and I'm terrible at computers, but even I have one. Yeah, you go to the library and do the computer. But the fact is, when you purchase a computer or when you go to upgrade, what are the basic things you're looking for? What? Advanced features. You want more processing speed, right? You want more capacity, more RAM. That's right. That's the right word. Well, DNA is kind of like that, except it's on steroids. Bill Gates, next. There's Bill. It's not his best picture, but it's more like, he says that DNA is more like a complex computer, and it's beyond anything we could ever possibly design. And talk about tiny. The cell is 1/10 the size of the head of a pin. Now think about the head of a pin, how tiny that is. Imagine 1/10 that size. That's a cell. Inside the cell, there are 3 billion units of DNA. 3 billion. Okay, I'm trying to I'm trying to wrap my mind around how big 3 billion is. So a stack of 3 billion $1 bills would stack in a pile 203.9 miles high. It would literally go into space. That's how much DNA is in the cell. And then consider this, there are trillions of these cells. There are trillions of these cells in our body. This is staggering complexity beyond our comprehension. And many scientists today believe that it could not just happen by chance. Well, back to the computer scenario. Scientists understand that DNA functions very much like a computer software program. It uses a genetic 4-digit character code, which I'll have to ask Kevin what that means because I don't know. But it's more complex than anyone has ever devised. For a biological system to operate, it needs genetic information. So this begs the question, where did this information and complexity come from? What is the source of DNA's genetic code? Does all this overwhelming complexity seem like it just happened by accident? Now think about this. What is true science? Does anybody know what true science is? True science is, it takes you where the evidence leads. If I'm trying to figure something out, but I have a preconceived idea of what I think I'm going to find, then I'm not doing true science. True science says it'll take you where the evidence leads, not where you want it to go. Mathematicians have calculated that the universe filled with monkeys, now get this. No. Mathematicians have calculated that a universe filled with monkeys relentlessly typing throughout all time have no realistic chance of producing Shakespeare's play Hamlet, much less a transcript of the genetic code required to build even the simplest of cells. Paleontology, next. Stay awake, stay awake. There you go. How many have heard of the Cambridge explosion? Yeah, that's what I meant. Cambrian. I was thinking of the college where I wish I could have gone and I didn't. Cambrian explosion. Well, supposedly this dates back to 530 million years ago. Scientists can't explain why, when they study the fossil record, there's just what they think are millions of years of perfectly preserved fossils of simple organisms. And then all of a sudden, abruptly, there's this explosion of all these complex organisms with spinal columns and compound eyes and articulating limbs. Evolutionists don't like to talk about this very much. Have you heard of the missing link, anybody? They have been trying to find the transitionary organisms between different species to prove evolution, and they've not been able to do it. They've tried to create and assemble little bits of bones and whatever to make it look like that, but they've never really been able to find this missing link. They're trying to force an assumption. God has an answer for us. In Genesis 1, it says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to its kind, cattle, according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So what does it mean, and its kind? According to its kind. What's that mean? Anybody? Right. According to its own species. Can cats mate with dogs? Because they're a separate species. They can't develop some new creature. How many people have a dog? How many different breeds of dog are there? I don't even know anymore. It seems like every year whole new breeds come up, cockapoos, and just it's endless. But they're still, no matter how tiny they are or how monstrous they are, they're still dogs. Species can only mate within their own kind. Today, because we live in a world that is becoming increasingly secular and godless, mainline media always refers to the theory of intelligent design as faith-based, which kind of undermines it. This is what they think. So much for today's biology lesson on the left there. God's finger points at all these things. Turning now to the subject of intelligent geography, and of course the earth is flat, right? So that's what they think of those of us that believe in creation. If you go to do a research on intelligent design on the computer, you will also find that it takes a while because they put all of the information that supports evolution up front, and it's hard to actually find this stuff. I think this is what the evolutionists are missing. They're confusing the evidence for the theory for the implications of the theory. Does that make sense? Because you do true science and you go where the evidence points, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an implication that it's God-based. I think Dr. Stephen Meyer from Cambridge University has a better answer for this. The theory is not based on theistic or God belief, but the discovery of digital code in cells, miniature machines in cells, fine-tuning the laws of physics and chemistry, and standard methods of scientific reasoning. It is not based on preconceived notions, but of going where the facts lead, even if it's uncomfortable. If you're a true scientist, the facts take you sometimes places where you don't expect it to take you, and you can be uncomfortable with that. If I was an evolutionist and I really was honest about a lot of these things that we've discovered, are you going to be a true scientist and go where the facts lead, or are you going to stubbornly hold on to your preconceived ideas? Did you know that more than 700 respected researchers from major universities across the world have signed a document that states, "We are skeptical of claims of the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence of Darwin theory should be encouraged." Now, they're saying it very softly, but they're saying that you need to be honest when you look at the Darwinian theory. As Christians, we don't have to stop using our brains or think that true science is diametrically opposed to faith. The more science uncovers, the more it points to an intelligent designer. It's no coincidence that God placed our planet in just the perfect spot within the solar system to support life. We have just the right mass and gravity on our planet. We have a magnetic field that protects us from the sun's radiation. We have an oxygen-rich atmosphere and water, and we're in a perfect location within our galaxy to be able to look out into the universe. Mathematicians have calculated that the odds of these conditions for life come together to be in the same place at the same time. And I can barely even say this, 1/1000th of 1/1000000000th of a chance. Would you play a lottery if that was your odds? That number is so big I can't comprehend it, but it's safe to say we are rare in our galaxy. God gave us the ability to comprehend and make scientific discoveries, and I believe that was part of his plan. The universe was designed to be discovered because it proves to us God's grandeur, his creative power, and his ability. I'm going to leave you with this verse. Romans 1:20 through 23. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, etc., etc. God's saying that these people that are denying him and his creative power are fools. So the next time someone tries to belittle your faith, make you feel less than because you believe in creation, remember, it takes more faith to believe in random chance than it does in intelligent design. Amen.